Well, here in Davos in 2023, India has been very much a bit of a buzzword. The India presence is actually very, very large. Several state governments, several ministers from the centre, several state ministers as well. Some of India's biggest business leaders, thought leaders, among others, all over here. And in as much as the focus has been on come to India, invest in India, see the opportunities that we have, there is a lot which perhaps needs to be said about what India offers other countries and whether we are doing enough to ensure that that becomes a reality. At the moment, other than the IT space and the merchandising space, why aren't there more Indian brands outside? Why aren't there physically Indian companies outside in the numbers which would make India truly international? Joining us to discuss this, Romal Shetty of Deloitte. Thanks, Romal, for being with us. Shobana Kamineni of Apollo Hospitals and Jayadev Galla of the Amara Raja Group. Thank you all very much for being with us. Now, Shobana, it's interesting, before we started, you mentioned that, you know, to be global, you have to actually play that game. You have to establish your presence outside. Now, the Apollo Group has already done that in the United Kingdom. How is that being accepted? An Indian company in healthcare, you know, people come to our country for healthcare, but setting up shop in the United Kingdom, how has it worked for you?
It's actually easier if you can imagine, because almost one out of two people in the UK are being treated by an Indian physician.
Right.
So there's no like credibility gap. They actually know the capability of Indians, and I think that helps. But the reason that we're really doing that is because we believe that this could be the big decade of service exports from India. You know, in terms of manpower, as the world is graying, then you have to look for alternatives, and India is a great source for that, because we do need to upskill and we need to give good jobs to almost 1 million youth every year, you know, for us to keep growing. I think it's an imperative. And this is something that we've actually identified across the globe, across India and our company, to see which are the places that we can look. And so, of course, it requires visas, it requires a lot of change, but I'm really hoping that, you know, one is that governments have seen this and they need it. And so just like the vaccine, that you open up all doors, when you're pushed against the wall, I'm really hoping that this could be a very favorable time for India to push through such things, and definitely the government understands it. The second thing the government understands is the fact that you know, India can be, because of our resources and what we have, some of the infrastructure for health for the entire region now stressed. So if you're having a large wait at NHS, why don't you just come to India and get treated? So there's opportunities there for us to be global from within, and I think that's the exciting thing that we can do. And I just want to leave you with that thought, that there's a huge opportunity. In fact, last night I was at a dinner, and there were 15 people at the table, and 6 out of them had experienced Apollo, and this is global, or, you know, in some form or shape. Africa, we came to you, we sent someone to you, stuff like that. And then finally the host turned around and said, I think you're the co-host.
Well, that's fantastic to hear. Romal, but this, you know, I mean, it's a wonderful example of what Indians can do in other markets. But the fact of the matter is that exports continue to be a source of concern. They are shrinking. So what's the overall macro picture in terms of Indian exports outside?
Yeah, so clearly there are two parts to it. One is, if you look at the services side, I think we continue. I think newer areas, IT, we've always been very, very strong, but now healthcare and other services. In fact, to some extent, my belief is that this is the decade of digitization. This is also the decade for India, and this is also the decade for India to be the front office of the world.
Right.
We've always been the back office of the world. So whatever has happened can actually now happen anywhere. So in that sense, I think we've really progressed. On the manufacturing side, I mean, there are 2 or 3 aspects I think that are critical. One is clearly R&D, right? The amount of R&D that we are, as Indian companies, that we will need to do. The second bit is also branding. I think it's, if you really look at it, it's, I think both of them these are world-class companies. All right, there's nothing, we work across the world, there's nothing different between them and anybody else. But the concept of branding is extremely important to communicate outside the quality. And if you look at our Mars mission, it's phenomenal, right? How many folks have put something on the Mars at being frugal, but at the same time, no quality compromises. And the perception, India has to be known for something, right? Whether it is quality, whether it is something else, that is an important moniker, and that has to be done both at a government level and individual companies level. So I think if we can get that right, you will have a lot more Indian companies doing it. Just from the sheer quality of talent that we have, most global companies actually have Indians, even in terms of product, in terms of design and others. So we don't see a reason why
there should be more companies.
There should be more companies, absolutely.
For your group, and you were telling me that the Indian Ocean Rim is where you operate in terms of exports. What's the acceptance been when you say that you've got world-class batteries, you're an Indian company? What sort of reception was there initially?
Well, for us, the biggest factor is also tariffs.
Right.
Tariffs have been coming down quite a bit in the last couple of decades. But if, in countries like Singapore, for instance, which had very low tariffs, we've been market leader in Singapore for more than a decade now. And it's a very high quality market. Yes. It's not a low quality market. We're competing with Japanese brands, we're competing with German brands. And we're winning in that market because we're able to be competitive because of low tariffs. In countries where there's higher tariffs, we're not able to compete because our margins, as a manufacturing product and as a manufactured product which is very material, very high material content, you can only have your margins are only so much. So we are not able to compete in high tariff markets. But in terms of brand, yes, and acceptability of the brand itself. Very good, very good. I mean, Amara Raja in India, of course, you're huge. I mean, we all run to get batteries, whenever our car batteries die, let's get one which lasts. In fact, for a while we were making, our brand we were selling in all the countries. Yeah. In Japan, we were selling it on a German brand. For our then partner was sourcing from us. So it was actually a German brand being sold in Japan, made in India. Right. At a premium to made in Japan product. Right. Now, if you again look at batteries in the battery space, and over here we keep talking about sustainability, in terms of innovation, in terms of the next generation of batteries, in terms of their manufacture at cost, something which is that something you're also looking at very closely? Would there be an Indian battery solution in a particular category which is going to be internationally acceptable? I think that the emerging market is basically electric vehicle. Yes. And that is still very nascent in India. We're having extremely low volumes right now. Even though the journey has started, the scale of is too low to be competitive. But in the lead-acid business, which is what we've historically been involved in, for automotive starter batteries as well as various industrial applications like telecom, railways, and so on, our competitiveness has increased with scale. Right. As the market for the goods and services in India becomes global in scale, we become globally competitive. Right. So we've reached a stage now where we are globally competitive in cost and in every other respect. But until we achieve that, the amount of money we can invest, Romal talked about R&D. We would be limited by our budgets because of the size of the business itself. So once we reach global scale, then we can compete globally on R&D and every other aspect as well. Romal, what does the government need to do potentially to actually encourage Indians to set up shop outside? We've got a big image now as a big economy, 5 trillion is where we are headed, etc., etc. But are there any policies which are required to encourage Indian companies from setting up shop outside?
Like I said, there are two parts to it. One is, I think, internal, which is, if you look at US in some sense, probably the most innovative country, right? The collaboration between the industry, the academia, right, maybe the startups, I think that ecosystem is what in some sense the government can facilitate and actually make it happen. And even if you see the number of PhDs, for example, at one point in time, some other countries probably made more PhDs than what we had in our entire history, right, in a year. So I think that's also the focus, right? So that's one part of it. But the second part is, as we have Incredible India, the campaign, and what India has been doing in terms of invest. So I think it's really nice, the program that they've been running. But it's also good to do some of the road shows for these to ensure that people are aware awareness is also important, because once people have experienced India, experienced our companies, then they realize that this is high quality, and and they can actually use it everywhere. So those are the two things I would say.
Shobana, would you say that branding and marketing is perhaps the biggest challenge? Let me give you a couple of examples. This is not a field that you are all at all associated with, but it's something I follow very closely, the defense space in India. We've reached a certain level of maturity. Our Hindustan Aeronautics produces world-class platforms. We accept the platforms, our armed forces put them through very rigorous trials, and they're adopted over a period of time. But if our domestic setup in, let us say, the defense sector were to try and sell those same weapon systems outside, people were like, why you? Then you compete with huge American brands, the Lockheed Martins or the Boeings of the world. And then you are immediately unable to do that because they have a certain brand image and a certain legacy. Now, this is just an example of the defense space. But would you say that the branding of Indian companies is perhaps in an international market or an international climate is something that needs to be looked at very closely?
So I want to put it in a different perspective. I think you picked a big daddy of, super difficult. But the world has changed to be so much more agile. So I think that the first privately owned space mission that India did, and there's another 5-6 startups, those will become global. So there are going to be things, that will innovate so fast and furiously and do it agilely that will disrupt the stronger players. And I think India has whatever, between the IITs and really smart folks that we have, the young people are now, they think it's their right. No one is scared anymore. But so I think what the government really needs to do is to find those, and we should do more. So there's venture capital out there that's putting money and helping them go global. I think that's a big one.
Yeah.
There are a lot of venture capital. I mean, we were talking about a firm today that does monitoring, an Indian company, that does all this. You put a patch, and the venture capital guys were saying we put in money at peanuts. Today the guy has moved to the US, and he'll become one of the biggest companies. So those are going against the big ones like the Medtronics and GEs and all of the world. So there will be disruption like that.
Sure.
And I think what's more important that we have to look at is that these guys are not afraid of failing. They'll try many things. There's money, there's capital available for them. But the big challenge of India and the branding is, how do we make this small into big? That transition jump, if you see it, very few Indian companies have really made the big time of that. And when we can start getting that formula right, I mean, so it's up to people like Amara Raja and all of them and Apollo that we have to make this.
Sure.
So that's the second part of what I believe will change the whole landscape of India and branding.
Sure. But at one level, just to flip the argument, in the IT space, we're doing phenomenally well. And I was speaking to the TCS leaders of North America and Europe. And one of my questions to them was that, look, there's retrenchment happening in the IT industry in America. We see the numbers. It's happening in India as well. So no, Vishnu, that's, we've just hired 57,000 people over the last 1 year. We are now the number 2 IT services company in the United States, and we have this plan, this plan, this plan. So our success, in the IT sector and various aspects of the IT sector, hasn't that also given us a big leg up when we talk about an entry into the global mindset?
No, absolutely. I mean, pretty much most of these guys are servicing most of the Fortune 100, 500 kind of companies. So clearly, I mean, in the IT side, I would actually say that the little bit of innovation required is to move towards the product sort of mindset. We're actually, as a country, pretty good at services, and we do very well. But the product mindset is a little bit different, and I think, but we have all the ingredients available. Right. So if you've got to make an AI machine or you've got to make something else, that's possible, right? So the IT companies will also probably have to start re-looking at some of that bit as well, because products also, they have a higher recall than services sometimes.
Right.
So I would say they definitely are big flag bearers. Even Deloitte, for example, 1/4 of our global workforce sits out of India, and they work for 100 plus countries.
Microsoft, Google, so all these have, they've Indianized the back office, like you said, but products, like if you walk down the street, you'll find Palantir, some of the other smarter
Yeah.
companies, so Indians have now started moving to that space. That's important.
Well, wonderful speaking to all of you. I think the focus over the next several years would need to perhaps evolve to seeing a greater Indian presence in several markets around the world, going beyond the IT stage. We've got two areas over here which we've looked at on this particular interview, this particular panel. But hopefully in the Davoses ahead, it'll be a lot more about the India story going abroad to several markets across sectors.
I had one particular. So I was walking with the owner of Manchester United, and he said, when I said every 10 steps you see an Indian company or an Indian presence, so India's everywhere down
Davos,
the promenade, down Davos promenade. But what he said is, I walk down the promenade and I see what the change will be in the world in the next 10 years.
Right.
So when you talk about the Indian decade, the fact that all of India down there, I think that is a harbinger that what's going to come.
Perhaps the next decade will bring a lot more for us. I have no doubt it will. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed.